Welcome to the second and final part of our lesson, Becoming Human. Moving from selfishness to selflessness, favoring cooperation over competition. In our 6-part series, Getting to Know Our Interreligious Partners. We begin with a rather lengthy quote that I think will offer us some context for where we've been, and of course also signal nicely where we're headed in this particular part 2. Karen Armstrong, she rightly asserts, "We are, the great spiritual writers insist, most fully ourselves when we give ourselves away. And it is egotism that holds us back from that transcendent experience that has been called God, Nirvana, Brahman, etc. What I now realize from my study of the different religious traditions is that a disciplined attempt to go beyond the ego brings about a state of ecstasy. Indeed, it is itself ecstasis. Theologians in all the great faiths have devised all kinds of myths to show that this type of kenosis, or self-emptying, is found in the life of God itself. They do not do this because it sounds edifying, but because this is the way that human nature seems to work. We are most creative and sense other possibilities that transcend our ordinary experience when we leave ourselves behind. Indeed, a dedicated Jew, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, you name it, will progressively move from ego-driven selfishness and competition to God-centered selflessness and cooperation more frequently, the closer they draw to the intended expression of their tradition, and in doing so, they invite transcendent experiences of ultimate divine reality. Now, particularly speaking from my context as a Christian, we'll move forward. God, as ultimate divine reality, has made the move from selfishness to selflessness, the root core of every religious tradition. God's love for humanity and creation is radically self-giving and all-inclusive. God freely gives of God's self as the ultimate divine reality from which all reality emanates. This reality is at work in and through all people to reunite the human family and to transform every aspect of our humanity. Popular author Brian McLaren rightly argues that this ultimate divine reality pre-exists all religions, cannot be contained by any single religion, and therefore can't be claimed as private property by any one religious tradition. Indeed, if God as ultimate divine reality is present in all, everyone, everything, everywhere, every time, and every place, we would expect God to be present in every religious tradition. For this reason, McLaren goes on to say, we also might expect that each religion, based on its unique location and history, would have a unique, particular, and evolving perspective from which to encounter the ultimate divine reality in a unique way, so that differences between religions represent additional data expressed in different systems of local imagery and language based on differing encounters with the same ultimate divine reality, present in all creation and across all time. God's work to transform humanity as ultimate divine reality is not limited to the Christian tradition. Jesus bears witness to God's work in and through other traditions in a number of instances, and we are called to do the same, to also bear witness to the good work that God is doing in other traditions. Jesus does so most famously in Luke's telling of the story of the Great Commandment. The Great Commandment, the Christian version of the Golden Rule, is found in each of the Synoptic Gospels. And in each case, the delivery of the Great Commandment is initiated when one of Jesus' Jewish contemporaries examines him aiming to test his orthodoxy, to test just how Jewish he is. In Matthew and Mark, Jesus delivers the Great Commandment over the course of this examination. However, in Luke's presentation, surprisingly, it is the religious authority that actually makes the delivery of the Great Commandment. He asks Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus then asks him, "Well, what does the tradition teach? What do you think?" The inquirer responds with the Shema, the most traditional and most common prayer in the Jewish tradition. Perhaps one of the most foundational declarations of faith in the Jewish tradition. And this is followed in Luke by the Great Commandment. Put together, it says this. He responds, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus affirms his response and challenges the man to go and do likewise, saying, "Do this, and you will live." The interesting thing about this exchange is that the religious leader, who in this case is a teacher of the Jewish law, already knows what he must do. He already knows what his tradition teaches, as the Shema and the Great Commandment together are central to the practice of his faith tradition. Perhaps even the root core, if you will. But now comes the true test. When the lawyer asks Jesus to qualify, specifically, just who fits into the category of neighbor, Jesus responds with the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, I won't go into the parable in detail because it's so well known, but before I begin discussing it, I want to make this point clear. Up until this point in human evolution, we had done well not to limit altruism to our kinship group alone, but we're including those within our ethnic and religious group as well, so that we would demonstrate our love and care and concern for people who were our family members. We were related to them genetically, people who were members of our ethnic group, and people who were members of our religious group as well. Most are familiar enough with the Gospels to know that Jews and Samaritans shared mutual contempt for one another. For example, in John's Gospel, the religious authorities intend to insult Jesus when they accuse him both of being a Samaritan and of being demon-possessed, all at the same time. Two things which, to Jesus' contemporaries, apparently went hand in hand. The Samaritans were literally being demonized. So when Jesus places a Samaritan, the conventional enemy of the Jews, in the role of the moral exemplar, the one who is following the Great Commandment properly, he is raising the bar on what it means to be fully human again. Indeed, his parable is designed to explode the hearer's expectations by inverting the roles of its characters. The good and the bad, the loved and the hated, the conventional neighbor and the conventional enemy are reversed. By doing this, Jesus challenges the cultural stereotypes of his day and provokes the hearer to think twice about her or his criteria for judging the value of those who inhabit other religious traditions, and also judging who is worthy of altruism. Not unlike Jesus' other parables, we have a scenario that plays out contrary to the way the hearer would expect, complete with actors that challenge the norm. As such, when the Samaritan, who is the religious other, is cast as the good neighbor, the teacher of the law is astonished. For he no doubt expected Jesus to have cast the wounded Jew on the side of the road as the wounded Samaritan, and the good neighbor as a merciful Jew who understands what it means to love one's neighbor as oneself. Jesus challenges the members of his faith tradition to look beyond the boundaries of their religious tradition, Judaism. Not just to signal that the neighbor that one should love as oneself is the religious other, or to demonstrate that one doesn't have to be Jewish or Christian or Buddhist or Muslim or Hindu to be a good neighbor. But most importantly, Jesus insists that there are examples of individuals demonstrating incredible acts of selfless love for neighbor that can be found outside of our religious tradition. Examples like that of the Good Samaritan that are worthy of our recognition and our emulation. Indeed, we have something to learn from our interreligious partners that may indeed help us live out our own tradition more faithfully and more completely, and vice versa, and in the process, become more human. It's very interesting to me here that not only does Jesus use this parable, this story of a Samaritan, the religious other, who is at the same time a religious enemy, uses this parable to describe what loving a neighbor looks like. And not only to describe what loving a neighbor looks like in a reciprocal altruistic way, but to describe what non-reciprocal altruism should look like in everyday life. Indeed, Jesus makes the enemy, who is also the religious other, the very limits of one's sphere of altruism, and insists that we should extend our altruistic tendencies towards everyone, and not just the recipient in a reciprocal way. Because as you remember in the story, Jesus has the Samaritan, pick up the wounded Jew on the side of the road and carry him to an inn, take care of his injuries, his wounds. Also, he takes care of all of the money that would need to be spent to put the man up for the night and for as long as he needed to be there so that he could heal. And not only that does he pay for it at that moment, but he gives all his money away to the innkeeper and says, if there's any left over, if there's any debt that's accrued while this individual is here recovering, I will, on my way back through, I'll pass through and I'll pay the difference. So Jesus, in this scenario, is demonstrating that this was a non-reciprocal altruistic scenario, wherein the Good Samaritan could not be guaranteed that this would ever be reciprocated in a one-to-one way. There's probably no way that the man would ever even encounter the Jew he took care of ever again, let alone to have an opportunity to have him reciprocate the altruism. So if we would engage in dialogue and mutual learning with our interreligious partners, I'm positive that, like the teacher of the law in this story, we will discover something as vital to our own religious tradition as its very root core, a root core that is shared by all religious traditions, as we've seen. If religion helped to make us human, should it surprise us that the root core of what made us human would be preserved in all enduring religious traditions? Since the very beginning, human societies have successfully evolved and grown in communal complexity as their individuals have selected cooperation and selflessness more often than competition and selfishness. And because we as individuals lean more towards selfishness and competition than selflessness and cooperation, religion has played a vital role in reminding us to put the needs of others above our own more often than we otherwise would. The world's enduring religious traditions share the same root core of moving from selfishness to selflessness, because from the very beginning, striving to live into this root core has inspired us more frequently to favor cooperation over competition to our benefit. And this is what makes us truly human. As we conclude our series, we end where we began in session 1. There, you may recall, we defined religion as an organizing pattern of living that helps to unite groups into communities of cooperation around a shared ultimate concern, something that is considered sacred. Well, etymologically speaking, the word religion means to reunite. In an unbroken line from their time to ours, the root core contained in all enduring traditions preserves the perennial wisdom of our first human ancestors, and it reunites us. They grew in their humanity as they came together as a community of communities, uniting around their shared ultimate concern for the sacredness of life. United by this same ultimate concern for the sacredness of life, guided by the root core shared by each of our traditions, bound by our common hope for humanity, inspired by our collective desire to raise the bar on human altruism, and grounded in mutual efforts to better understand the unique localized perspectives that each of our traditions bring to the whole. Let us cooperate as interreligious partners to form a dialogical community of communities and grow in our humanity together once again. As I wrap this up, I'd like to share just one quick little story that recently took place. As I was preparing for all of this study, of course, I was familiarizing myself once again with all of the traditions that we've studied. And as I did so, as my daughter often does, and she's 8, her name's Addie, you can see her there in this picture. As she often does, she would ask questions as she would see me thumbing through books and looking at videos online, and again, familiarizing myself with these traditions. And she asked a really compelling question, and I think it is a great way to sort of wrap up everything we've learned thus far. She said, "Dad, why are there so many different religions?" And then just before I could answer, before I could respond, she cut me off and at the very end said, "I mean, after all, isn't it enough to be human?"